Backyard Camping from Michael 131. I don't remember how old I was. I believe I was 7 years old. We had just moved in next door to my neighbor, whom we've known for about 15 years and was basically family. It was the 4th of July. I just got back from Wyoming. We had asked our neighbor if we could gather a bunch of our friends and camp in her backyard. She said yes, so we set up some tents and watched the fireworks before heading to our tents for the night. Sometime during the night, my sister had gotten up to go to the bathroom. She soon came back, seemingly uneventful. Later that evening, we heard huffing noises outside the tent. Mind you, bears around our parts in a rural village in Ohio, we don't have a dense enough forest to house bears. Usually it's just coyotes and deer and smaller predators. But it was a full moon, so we could see pretty well. Just outside the tents, it was a well-lit field. Keep this in mind, the footsteps and huffing noises kept circling the tents, and everyone heard it. As it approached my tent, I made out the unmistakable figure of a bear, seemingly searching for food or other scavengeable products. All of us were unarmed, as the massive creature began to paw and bite at the tent, easily creating ribbons out of the tent nylon. I'm not sure if it knew I was inside the tent, but it definitely wanted inside. Suddenly, one of my friends screamed, and the thing bounded away before it could get all the way in. This was terrifying. Imagine growing up in an area where bears don't exist, only to wake up in the middle of the night in a tent as one begins to chew through the wall. I'm so glad it was able to be scared away. Apparently, it wasn't that hungry. If you're wondering where the bear came from, it was apparently an escaped bear from a local zoo, and it just happened to come our way. It circled my tent all night. From James's Call. Location unknown. It was the early 1980s, and my dad and uncle both bought a summer home in the countryside, which had some beautiful, dense woods behind it. We would often go there over the summer and enjoy the serenity of nature away from the city. At that time, my cousin and I would hang out a lot together, and we spent many hours hiking deep into those woods behind the house. And being independent kids, we decided to take my dad's camping equipment and set up an overnight campsite about 100 feet away from the house. We did this every day, and it became the thing we did every summer. Our parents were always nearby in the house, and always kept their windows open where they could easily see and hear us. They were totally okay with us being alone in the woods at night, and sometimes even pushed us to spend more time out there, even when we didn't feel like it. It became our favorite getaway from the city, and each summer, we really looked forward to going. It was one particular summer. We weren't going to go because my uncle had to go out of state, but I had been waiting all year to go, and I was devastated after hearing that we wouldn't be going after all. It meant that I'd have to go to day camp with all those annoying kids from school, and they didn't treat me too kindly. Being a 5-hour drive north, my parents weren't going to make such a trip without my uncle and his family. So the answer was no and no. I never was a nagging child, and often tried to help out when I could. But that summer, oh, you bet I acted up. I made the summer pretty difficult whenever I could, and always mentioned to them how they could make it better for me. I didn't want to wait another whole year, and I tried my best to convince them with whatever tactic I thought would work. To my surprise, my constant nagging seemed to have worked on them, because one day, they finally gave in. I later realized that it was probably because a family friend decided to come along with us and make the trip worth our while. Anyway, we traveled together for 5 straight hours and finally reached our destination. I could smell that pine wood scent again, and I got ready to build my campsite. It took a little longer than usual because I was alone, but I got it all set up nice and dandy. I'd gone camping enough times before with my cousin, and I felt more than confident to be alone in the dark. Although I did decide to set up my tent a bit closer to the house, just in case. The sun began to set, and I glanced at my watch. It was 8:35 p.m. There was this unusual quietness that made me a bit anxious. But I was usually chatting with my cousin, and just thought I never noticed it, not until now. Part of our camping experience was reading science fiction novels until we got tired and fell asleep. And for that night, I brought an exciting new book I'd wanted to read for some time. Flashlight in one hand and book in the other, I began to read. This flashlight was one of those heavy metal ones that often flickered out. I'd have to hit it a couple of times and that would usually do the trick. It must have been around 4 a.m. when I was suddenly awakened by the sound of something brushing against my tent. At first, I wasn't sure if I had just imagined it or not, or if it was some rabbit that had passed by. But I quietly sat up for a moment and listened to my surroundings. There were no sounds and nothing special to hear, so I assumed it was just a small animal, and I tried to fall back to sleep. A few minutes passed by, and I was about to doze off, when something about 40 feet away from me made this freakishly angry feline growl that turned into what sounded like a woman with an old, hoarse voice. A cold shiver suddenly ran down my spine, and my thoughts began to race through my head as I imagined what it could be. It sounded human, but it also sounded like an animal. I thought of yelling for my mom and dad, but I was way too scared to even make a sound. I reached for my flashlight, and I turned it on. But instantly I realized the mistake I had made, as the growl suddenly became quiet. I quickly shut off the light, and I hid under my sleeping bag, hoping that it did not hear me, or that it had not seen my light. To my horror, it slowly approached and stopped right outside my tent. For a while, I just stood there, breathing loudly, and each breath sounded raspy and was full of moist pops and clicks, like its throat was filled with far too much saliva. I thought maybe it would go away if I just waited, but several more minutes passed, and the thing did not move. I could hear its head moving back and forth like it was trying to find me or sense where I was. But I didn't dare let out a breath or move a muscle. Every so often it would scratch the wall of the tent, like it was testing the walls, thinking about coming inside. But I prayed and prayed that it didn't. I waited, every single minute feeling like an entire hour. It kept circling me, walking and rubbing itself against the tent all night, trying to find a way to get into me, but it luckily never did. It wasn't until dawn broke, when the sun started to come up, that I finally heard it scurry away, and I no longer heard it. When my parents found me, they said that I was white like snow when they couldn't move. I was in such a state of shock that they rushed me to the hospital right away, and I stayed there for a couple of days. I only recovered a few months later, but I still get chills every time I share this story with people. I never went camping for many years after that, but I eventually did start camping again with a few buddies of mine over the years. I never did go back in the woods alone. My dad eventually sold the house to some couple who lives there to this very day, and I never experienced anything like it since. What it could have been, I can't tell you. Maybe it was just some crazy old woman, Or maybe it really was a monster.